Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be going over your fortune teller assignment. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to develop a console application that will tell the user's fortune based on data received from the user. So this is broken down into three parts for us to help make it a little easier. So let's look at those. Part one, we're going to be asking the user for some information about themselves. We want their first name, last name, their age, and so on. In part two, we're going to be using that information that they give us to determine their fortune. So let's look at this first one here, retirement years. We're going to be determining the number of years until the user retires based on whether the user's age is odd or even. So up here in part one, we grab the user's age from the console. In part two, we're going to do some math on that to determine whether it's odd or even, and use that to determine how many years it will be until that user retires. And we're going to do that for all the other variables too. We'll be determining their vacation home location, their mode of transportation, and their bank balance in the same way. Then in part three, we're just going to be displaying the user's fortune in this format. Everything in the brackets here is something that we're asking the user for. First name, last name. Rather, we're either asking the user for it or we're using the information that we got from the user to determine it in part two, with number of years, bank balance, vacation home, and mode of transportation. So just to go over it one more time, we're asking the user for all this information up here. We're going to be storing that information, and then in part two, we'll be using it to determine the user's fortune. And in part three, we will be displaying the user's fortune. So let's take a look at how we might do this in the code. So here I just have set up with a scanner to read the user's input from the console. So let's, for the sake of an example, let's ask the user for their favorite number between 1 and 3. So we're going to print that to the console. The user will put in their favorite number between 1 and 3. And we're going to store that information as a variable. In this case, we'll do int fav number equals input.nextInt. So that allows us to take the information that the user is putting in and store it as a variable. So that's part one. Now for part two, we're going to use this information, use their favorite number to determine something about their fortune. So let's do their bank account with this one. So we're going to use another int for their bank balance, and we're just going to start it off at 0. And now we're going to start the logic of part two of determining what their fortune will be based on that favorite number. So we're going to do this with an if statement to start. So if their favorite number is equal to 1, we will give them a bank balance of $10,000. If their bank account is equal, or if their favorite number is equal to, we'll give them a bank balance of $5,000. And if their favorite number is 3, they will be the winners. We'll give them a bank balance of $1 million. And now we need a default case in case the user put in a number outside the range of 1 to 3, and we'll give them a bank balance of negative $10,000. So at this point, we have part one covered. We asked them for their favorite number, and we stored that favorite number as an integer. Then for part two, we're using that information to determine their bank balance. using these conditionals here. They're going to have a bank balance of either 10,000, 5,000, a million, or negative 10,000, depending on what their answer was to their favorite number between 1 and 3. So now for part 3, we need to display this information for the user. So you will retire with a bank balance of dollars, and then we will just concatenate our bank balance variable to that. We're restoring the information we determined in part 2. So let's run this and make sure everything is working as we believe it should. So it's prompting us here for our favorite number between 1 and 3. I'll put in 1, and we get, you will retire with a bank balance of $10,000, which, as you remember, $10,000 was our condition for their favorite number being 1. So that's working correctly. Let's make sure that it works for the other cases as well. Yep, we put in 2, we get $5,000. We put in 3, we get $1 million. And let's put in 45, and we get negative $10,000. Ah, that's not the best way to display that. I see. You would normally put the negative sign before a dollar sign. That can be something for you guys to play around with if you want to, or you can just make the default case be $0. That's a design choice that we will leave up to you. So this code is working perfectly well, and it performs all 3 parts of our fortune teller assignment. Let's just look at another way to handle the conditionals here. So instead of chaining together if-else statements like this, we can use something called a case switcher that does pretty much the same thing. It just looks a little more elegant. So we're going to be determining our logic based on fav number, the user's favorite number. So in the case that the user's favorite number is 1, bank balance will be equal to 10,000. And then we need a break at the end of every case, because if we don't have one, the case switcher will continue executing the instructions below that, which we do not want it to do in this example. Case 3, bank balance equals 1 million. And then we need a default case again. And we will, let's give them 0 this time, so the display will look a little bit better for us at the end. All right, so now let's run this. This code should function exactly the same as it did with the if-else statements. And we can see that, yes, it does. We're getting 10,000, 5,000, a million. And then let's put something outside the range. And yes, you will retire with a bank balance of 0. So that's how you handle fortune teller. Again, part 1, ask the user for information, store that information as a variable. Part 2, do some logic on that variable to determine the user's fortune. And then part 3, display that information for the user.